The message came in at 9:12 p.m. I remember the time because I was about to close the strongest quarter my firm had ever posted when my phone vibrated against the glass conference table. Sarah, I expected something ordinary. Dinner, traffic, a joke about me working too late. Instead, I opened the text and read, I need to be alone for a while. Don't take it personally. 8 years of marriage. A house in Wellesley. Joint accounts. Joint investments. Her name on the deed because I insisted. And somehow this wasn't personal. I called her immediately. Voicemail. 3 minutes later, another message. I'm staying at Megan's. Please don't come over. I just need space. You've been a lot lately. You've been a lot. That one landed harder than the first. Before I could respond, Instagram notified me she had posted. I opened it. Rooftop bar. City skyline behind her. Champagne in her hand. That smile. The one she hadn't aimed at me in months. Caption. Choosing myself for once. In the reflection of the glass behind her was a silhouette. Tall. Broad shoulders. Ryan. I didn't need the face. He had been orbiting our conversations for months. Founder. Visionary. Fearless. The kind of man who mistakes volatility for intelligence. She used to repeat his lines at dinner. He actually lives. He doesn't overthink. He moves fast. Translation. He doesn't build anything that lasts. My phone buzzed again. And please don't try to fix this. That's exactly what I'm tired of. There it was. She wasn't confused. She was experimenting. And she expected me to chase. To show up at that rooftop. To demand explanations. To compete. For 12 minutes, I considered it. I stared at that reflection in the glass and wondered if I had become so predictable that chaos looked like growth. That was the only moment I thought about fighting for her the way she expected. Then I closed the app. I typed back. Take all the space you need. She read it instantly. No reply. That told me everything. This wasn't departure. This was leverage. She hadn't packed. Her jewelry was still on the dresser. Her laptop charger still on the nightstand. She thought space meant pause. She thought I would hold the structure steady while she tested instability. What she didn't understand was this. Space changes variables. And variables change risk. By 11 p.m., I wasn't looking at photos anymore. I was looking at our financial dashboard. Not as a husband. As a man assessing exposure. At 12:48 a.m., there was a charge from the rooftop bar. 2 premium cocktails. At 1:21 a.m., a rideshare to Back Bay. Not Megan's apartment. An executive rental building I knew well, the kind of place men like Ryan lease short-term to simulate permanence. By 8:15 the next morning, she posted again. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Coffee on marble. His reflection in stainless steel. Caption. Day 1 of choosing differently. Differently. She thought this was evolution. It was reallocation. At 9:30 a.m., I called my attorney. Not in anger. In recalibration. By noon, half of our liquid assets were moved under my corporate trust. Not drained. Repositioned. At 2:07 p.m., she texted. Thank you for being mature about this. Mature. In her mind, that meant compliant. It meant I would stabilize everything while she explored volatility. What she didn't realize was that stability is a decision. And decisions can be withdrawn. That afternoon, one of my analysts forwarded an internal update. Ryan had just lost another minor investor. Quietly. Nothing public yet. But in tech, money leaves before headlines appear. I leaned back in my office chair and looked out over the skyline. She believed she was stepping into something alive. She didn't realize she had stepped onto scaffolding. And scaffolding only feels solid until someone stops financing what's underneath it. For the next 3 days, I didn't call her. I didn't ask where she was sleeping. I didn't comment on her posts. And that unsettled her more than anger would have. Ryan, meanwhile, did what men like him always do when pressure rises. He performed. He posted about momentum, about vision, about building through noise. But money doesn't respond to captions. By Friday, an internal memo began circulating among mid-tier investors. Delayed rollout. Bridge financing discussions. Operational adjustments. Polite language. Translation, runway shrinking. That evening, Sarah called. Not a text. A call. Ryan's under pressure, she said carefully. Startups aren't linear. I'm aware, I replied. Silence. You froze the joint investment account, she added. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me you moved into an executive rental with him. That was the first real pause. You've been tracking me. No, I corrected. I've been tracking exposure. She didn't like that answer because it removed emotion from the narrative. She wanted to frame this as growth. I framed it as risk. 2 days later, an article surfaced in a mid-tier tech publication. Nothing dramatic. Just a question. Can his valuation survive another delay? In tech, doubt spreads faster than hype. By noon, the article was circulating through LinkedIn. By 2, investors were asking about liquidity. By 4, Sarah texted, "Have you seen what they're writing?" "Yes." "It's exaggerated," she said quickly. "I'm sure." She didn't post that night. Ryan did. A video, sleeves rolled up, talking about resilience, about shaking off noise. But the comments weren't what they used to be. Less applause, more questions. One investor wrote, "Would appreciate clarity on runway." That's not criticism. That's warning. Sunday afternoon, Sarah came to the house unannounced. She still had her key. She walked in like someone testing whether the building still recognized her. "I just needed a few things," she said. She opened drawers, took a dress, picked up a framed photo, and stared at it longer than she meant to. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked. "Anger doesn't alter outcomes," I said. She turned. "For someone who says this isn't personal, you've made it very official." "It became official when you left." Her jaw tightened. "You think he's going to fail?" "I think volatility reveals structure." She held my gaze. And for the first time, I saw something flicker behind her confidence. Not regret. Calculation. Because she was starting to realize something she hadn't accounted for. If Ryan collapsed, she wouldn't just be emotionally exposed. She would be financially disconnected from the only stable system she had operated inside. And I was no longer standing still waiting for her return. By Tuesday, Ryan's lead investor invoked a protective clause. Not public yet, but real. 30-day window to replace capital. If he failed, the company dissolved. That night, Sarah called again. This time, her voice wasn't composed. "Can we meet?" "Where?" "Not the house." Of course not. The house represented permanence. We met at a quiet restaurant near the harbor. Neutral ground. She looked perfect, controlled, but her movements were tighter than usual. After we ordered, she leaned forward. "Are you planning to file?" she asked. Strategic question. "I have documentation prepared," I said calmly. Her expression shifted. This wasn't supposed to escalate like this. It escalated when you introduced instability without discussion. She exhaled sharply. "If he fails, does that change anything for you?" There it was. Not love. Contingency. I held her gaze. "If he fails," I said evenly, "it changes your environment. Not my decision." For the first time, her composure cracked. Just slightly. Because she had assumed the door would remain open as long as she framed this as exploration. She hadn't realized pause shifts leverage. When the check came, I paid. As we stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly. "You really aren't angry." I said. "For how long?" 12 minutes. She didn't smile. And for the first time since she sent that first message, I saw uncertainty replace excitement. Because momentum was slowing, and silence was growing. The collapse did not arrive with a headline or a dramatic announcement that would allow anyone to prepare emotionally for impact. It arrived quietly, through absence, through silence where confidence had once been broadcast hourly, through the subtle but unmistakable withdrawal of noise from a man who had built his image on constant visibility. Ryan stopped posting. No motivational threads. No filtered rooftop reflections. No language about resilience or disruption. In the startup world, silence is rarely strategic. It usually means lawyers have entered the room. Thursday afternoon, Daniel called again, and this time he did not lower his voice theatrically or pretend the conversation was about a conference. "Off the record," he said, "the lead investor invoked the clause. He has 30 days to replace the capital. If he doesn't, it folds." Folds. Not slows. Not pivots. Folds. I thanked him and ended the call without commentary, because there is nothing to say when mathematics replaces momentum. Numbers do not argue, and they certainly do not respond to charisma. At 7:42 p.m., Sarah texted, "Can we talk tonight?" There was no emoji, no emotional framing, just urgency. "Come by," I replied. She arrived 20 minutes later, and for the first time since she had left, she did not carry the energy of someone experimenting with a better version of her life. She carried the energy of someone trying to understand how quickly the alternative had deteriorated beneath her. "He's restructuring," she said immediately, before even removing her coat, as if saying the word first would soften its meaning. I'm sure he is, I answered evenly. She paced once across the living room, something she only did when she was attempting to contain anxiety without allowing it to surface visibly. It's not what people think, she continued. It's temporary. He just needs to bridge the gap. Bridge the gap. I had read that phrase in investor reports before. It usually means someone underestimated gravity. You knew this would happen, she said finally, stopping in front of me. No, I replied. I knew it was possible. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly. It's called probability. Her composure tightened at that word. You keep talking like this is an investment portfolio. It is, I said without raising my voice. Marriage is shared risk. That landed harder than I expected, because she flinched, not dramatically, but enough to reveal that somewhere beneath the narrative she had constructed about growth and self-discovery, she understood that what she had framed as liberation had, in fact, been leverage tested against stability. He might lose everything, she said more quietly now. If the capital doesn't come through, it's over. And, I asked, and it's going to get messy. There it was. Not passion, not excitement. Messy. Investors withdrawing. Employees unpaid. Public speculation. And she was publicly visible beside him in every filtered photo that had declared independence from structure. Why are you so calm? She asked again. And this time there was no accusation in her tone, only unsettled recognition. Because I prepared for instability the night you left, I answered. You prepared for us to end? I prepared for the possibility that you would not return for the right reason. That sentence settled into the room like weight. She looked at me as if trying to determine whether I had already made a decision without telling her. He didn't lie to me, she said defensively, though I had not accused him of anything. He believed in what he was building. And you believed in him, I replied. Yes. Why? She hesitated, and in that hesitation was the real fracture. Not financial, not social, but psychological. Because he felt alive, she said finally. Because he didn't move through life calculating every possible failure. And you think I do. You do. I let that hang between us before responding. I calculate when someone depends on me. Her eyes shifted slightly at that. Because responsibility sounds different when spoken without aggression. It sounds less like control and more like weight willingly carried. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. If this collapses, she said, staring at the floor now, I don't want to be locked out. That sentence was more honest than anything she had said since 9:12 p.m. on the night she chose space. Not I miss you. Not I made a mistake. Not even I love you. I don't want to be locked out. She had assumed space meant optionality, that she could step outside the structure, test volatility, and re-enter without cost if the experiment failed. She was beginning to understand that structures do not remain unchanged while someone evaluates alternatives. I walked to my desk and retrieved the folder I had prepared days earlier. I placed it on the coffee table between us. What's that? She asked, though she already knew. Separation documentation, I said. Prepared, not filed. Her breathing shifted. You were actually going to do it. I was going to protect what I built. She stared at the folder for a long moment, but did not touch it, because touching it would make the scenario real rather than theoretical. And if I come back? She asked quietly. Come back to what? I replied. To us. I studied her face carefully, searching not for regret, but for clarity. Coming back isn't proximity, I said. It's alignment. And if I align, she pressed. Then we negotiate from honesty instead of assumption. That was not romantic. It was not cruel. It was structural. Because once a load-bearing wall cracks, you don't pretend it was decorative. You either reinforce it properly or you remove it entirely. She stood slowly. I need time, she said. You have it, I replied. And for the first time since she had walked out claiming she needed space, I saw uncertainty replace confidence completely, because Ryan was losing capital, and I was no longer the man she could safely assume would remain unchanged while she evaluated the market. Volatility had revealed structure, and she was standing between the two, realizing too late that momentum without foundation is just noise waiting to quiet down. The announcement came on a Friday morning, carefully worded and strategically delayed until just before market close, as if timing could soften reality. Ryan's company issued a statement describing a temporary operational pause pending capital realignment, a phrase polished enough to calm amateurs but transparent enough to alarm anyone who had ever reviewed distressed assets. By noon, the language had evolved. Temporary became uncertain. Realignment became liquidation. The lead investor's withdrawal was confirmed without direct attribution, which in financial circles is the equivalent of being named without being quoted. Confidence in leadership required reassessment. Leadership, that word does not bruise loudly. It erodes quietly. At 1:14 p.m., Sarah called. Not texted. Called. Her voice had lost the brightness it carried when she first declared she was choosing differently. It was stripped now, controlled, but no longer inflated by projection. He's moving out of the rental, she said. They're consolidating expenses. Of course they were. Executive leases evaporate when runway disappears. And I asked calmly. And it's serious, she admitted. This isn't just a rough cycle. I allowed silence to sit between us long enough for that word to take shape. Serious. For weeks, she had framed this as excitement versus predictability. Now it was liquidity versus liability. If I walk away from this now, she said slowly, is it too late? There it was. Not longing. Not apology. Timing. It depends, I answered evenly. On what? On whether you're walking away because it collapsed or because you see it clearly. She did not respond immediately, and that hesitation told me more than any declaration could have. One is retreat. The other is recognition. That evening she returned to the house without announcement. No dramatic entrance. No defensive explanation. She placed her bag by the door and stood in the kitchen as if recalibrating her own narrative in real time. I ended it, she said. Why? I asked. She looked at me as if the answer were obvious. Because it's unstable. That wasn't the question, I said. She inhaled slowly. Because I thought unpredictability meant growth, she said carefully. And it didn't. That was closer, but not complete. And I pressed. And because I realized I was measuring you against noise, she admitted. That sentence shifted the room. Not because it was romantic, but because it was honest. I walked toward the window and looked out at the skyline, steel rising in controlled lines from foundations that had been inspected, reinforced, stress-tested before anyone called them permanent. If his funding had closed successfully, I said without turning around, would you still be here tonight? She didn't answer immediately, and that silence was the most truthful moment of the entire conversation. Finally, she said, I don't know. That was the only acceptable answer. You didn't leave because you were unhappy. I continued evenly. You left because you believed there was a higher ceiling available, and you wanted to test it before committing fully to what we built. She nodded once. Yes. There was no anger in me when she confirmed it. Only clarity. Testing alternatives, I said, turning back toward her, comes with consequences when the alternative collapses. I understand that now, she replied. No, I corrected calmly. You understand the risk. Consequences are different. Her shoulders lowered slightly, as if the weight of sequence had finally settled into place. I don't want to lose this, she said. You already did. I answered, not cruelly, but truthfully. What you're asking for now is a new agreement. And is that possible? Not for the version of us that existed before, I said. That version operated on assumed loyalty. This one would require proven alignment. She stepped closer. I thought you would fight, she said quietly. I thought if you loved me, you wouldn't let me walk away. I did love you, I replied, which is why I refused to compete for you. That was the first time her composure fractured fully. Not theatrically, not dramatically, just enough for emotion to surface beneath control. I mistook your stability for something smaller, she said. Yes, I agreed. You did. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't hostile silence. It was final, because in that moment she understood what had shifted. She had assumed space was leverage. I treated it as decision. And decisions, once evaluated under stress, either restructure permanently or dissolve completely. There is no return to the original blueprint, only revision. And revision requires cost. She stayed that night, not in the way she used to, not with assumption, not with possession. We didn't touch. We talked. Long, deliberate sentences. No raised voices. No emotional theatrics. Just clarity forced into places where comfort used to live. She explained that what drew her to Ryan wasn't love, not even desire in its simplest form, but the sensation of unpredictability, the illusion that being near volatility meant she was evolving instead of maintaining. She said somewhere along the way she began confusing discipline with stagnation because stability does not advertise itself the way chaos does. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked one question. If his funding had cleared last week, would you still be here? She didn't answer. Not immediately. And that silence was more honest than anything she could have constructed. Finally, she said, I don't know. I nodded once. That's the problem, I said. She looked up at me then, eyes steady but exposed. I chose wrong, she said. You chose, I corrected. That distinction mattered. Wrong implies accident. Choice implies agency. Agency carries responsibility. I thought you would chase me, she said quietly. I know. And you didn't. No. Why? Because if someone wants space, I said evenly, you give them the full dimensions of it. She absorbed that slowly. You're filing, aren't you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at her the way I would look at a structure that had just endured stress testing, not with anger, but with assessment. I prepared for instability, I said, and instability occurred. That's not the same as ending us. No, I agreed, but it's the same as redefining us. She stood there, searching for something in my face that no longer existed. Urgency, fear, the instinct to preserve at any cost. What would it take, she asked. Accountability, I said calmly. Transparency, and an understanding that loyalty is not a provisional clause. I can give you that. Now, I replied. The word lingered between us. Now, after exposure, after collapse, after visibility. The next morning, I filed. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I was angry, but because clarity had arrived. When she received the official notification that afternoon, she didn't call. She came to the office. She stood in the doorway while I reviewed architectural plans for a data center project downtown. Steel, concrete, calculations that accounted for worst-case scenarios before the first beam was installed. You said you hadn't filed, she said quietly. I said not yet. Her breathing shifted. So this is punishment? No, I answered, meeting her eyes. This is alignment. She stepped further into the room. I ended it with him. You ended it after the collapse, I replied. That matters. Her composure fractured then, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to reveal that sequence is heavier than intention. I don't want to lose this, she said. You already did, I answered gently. What you want now is renegotiation. And you won't? I don't rebuild on provisional loyalty. Silence. The kind that doesn't invite negotiation. I loved you, she said. I know, I replied. That's it. That's enough. Because love without discipline collapses under pressure. And discipline without reciprocity becomes containment. She had mistaken containment for suffocation. And by the time she realized the difference, the structure had already shifted. The legal process moved forward cleanly. No public statements. No spectacle. Ryan's company dissolved within 30 days. The rooftop posts disappeared. The executive rental was vacated. But deletion does not reverse sequence. 3 months later, she sent a message. Can we talk? I looked at the screen for a long time before turning the phone face down. Outside my window, steel was rising for the new project, load-tested, reinforced, engineered to withstand volatility before it ever experienced it. She believed space was leverage. I treated it as decision. And decisions, once executed without noise, do not reverse themselves simply because exposure proved disappointing.